Resources Committee to order. We'll begin with item number 2, the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Please stand. Following the pledge, we'll have a brief moment for silence and reflection. I pledge allegiance to the flag, to the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we will move on to item number 3, public comment, 15-minute limit. I have got 2 individuals that have indicated that they would like to speak under public comment. We do have some other individuals signed up to address one of the rezones, just to give the audience some background. The time to address the committee for the rezones is typically done during the rezone hearing where public testimony is accepted. So without any objection, I'm just going to assume that that's where those individuals are going to want to address the committee, and we'll move on to general public comments. There's a 15-minute limit. I'll set a limit of 7.5 for each individual. I doubt anyone will reach that time, but just in case, the limit will be 7.5. And we will begin with Kelly King. Individuals wishing to address the committee, please approach the mic at the back of the room. Is the rule name and address, or what is the rule?
I'm going to do it.
Oh,
Municipality.
state your name and municipality, please.
Kelly King. My address is 2254 County Road H, Edgar, Wisconsin.
All right.
Okay, it's on large ordinance of gathering. Okay, we have a dairy breakfast every year, and we have about 2,200 people come to our dairy breakfast. We run about 400 people an hour through our thing. It takes about 38 minutes for them to sit. We get 55 tables, 8 at a table. We have room to seat 450 people, okay? So there's no, all the dairy breakfasts do about the same. Marathon County's a little larger, okay? But most of them do exact same thing. They sit about 38 minutes, and, we just keep moving people through the system. We start at 7, we're done at noon. I oppose us to make any limits on the dairy breakfast. If you have any questions, I probably can answer them. I've been chair for 5 years or something like that.
All right, thank you. And the other individual indicated they would like to address the committee is William Litzer. Approach the mic at the back of the room. State your name and municipality, please.
William Litzer, 218855 County Road S, Marathon, Wisconsin, town of Emmett. I'm here to talk about 1204 as well. I don't just come here as a resident of the town of Emmett, but I do as a past president of the AgriFA alumni and current the area rep for the state alumni. And in the areas like in Marathon County here, if everyone planned it right, we would have 8 dairy breakfasts, excluding the Marathon County one, for an FFA alumni realm. And on December 18th, I took the action of having an educational hearing with Gary Poggle and his supervisor, which was great to have as a host. We had Abbotsford, Colby, Athens, and the town clerk of Emmett, Jerry Fitzgerald, come out. And we talked about our concerns and understand the education of this ordinance. And from the feedback I got from my FA alumni, we would like to see that threshold stay at 3,000 or raise the threshold. And I have great faith in my FA alumni affiliates as what they do to create a great success event, along with creating success for the people that do come out and represent us to what we serve to support these kids. And I encourage you as a committee and as a board to make sure if you put this forward or repeal it, that you do not make a burden on us as alumni for what we do for the kids. Thank you.
Thank you. And seeing as no one else signed up to speak under public comment, we're going to move on to item number 4, approval of December 3rd, 2024 committee minutes. Motion approved be in order. Motion by Supervisor Kroll, second by Supervisor DeBrew. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. We'll move on to item 5, operational functions required by statute, ordinance, or resolution. We have 5A 1 through 4. 5A 1 through 4. We are now going to open the public hearing for items 5A 1 through 4. Marathon County ERC is now meeting in public hearing on the location, plan specifications, and purpose of the following projects. 5A1, Steve and Dawn Eisenberg, rural residential to rural estate town of Knowlton. 5A2, Arthur and Lori Young on behalf of Charles and Linda Young, general agriculture to low-density residential town of Green Valley. 5A3, Shad Harvey, Conservation Planning and Zoning, Land Resources Manager to amend the General Code of Ordinances for Marathon County, Chapter 22, Shoreline, Wetland, and Floodplain Code. The text amendments may be viewed, there's a link to the code in the language here. And then lastly, Shad Harvey, Conservation Planning and Zoning, Land Resources Manager for the adoption of Chapter 27 Floodplain Code into the General Code of Ordinances for Marathon County. I would ask that anybody joining us electronically, unless you're addressing the community, please mute yourself, and everybody who's joining in person, please mute your electronic devices so we avoid interruptions. I'll just go through the members of the committee quickly. Myself, Chair Longenhan. We have Supervisor Drabeck, Supervisor Kroll, Supervisor Schoenborn, Supervisor DeBrew, Tom Miller, our agricultural interest representative, and then Marilyn Banner, Wisconsin Towns and Villages Association representative. The establishment of the ERC is required by law for purposes of administration of county ordinances and land conservation programs. This committee must follow state laws and local ordinances as written. This committee cannot change or ignore any part of the ordinances or state laws and must apply the laws as written. The purpose of this committee is to hear and decide on proposed ordinances and ordinance revisions, rezoning petitions, and provide direction on land conservation and planning programs. The ERC will give a full and fair hearing to any person applying for a rezone petition. A taped recording is being made of the meeting, which will assist with preparation of written hearing minutes. The committee is interested in hearing all pertinent comments and questions. Each hearing will be opened by reading the public notice and allowing staff to present a staff report, including evidence from any on-site inspection. The applicant, anyone wishing to testify, will be sworn in and allowed to give testimony. Witnesses will be called in the order of those first in favor, second opposed, and then third is interested may appear. The committee may ask questions of the zoning staff and applicant. It is necessary that we set a reasonable time limit on individual statements and on the overall length of the hearing. To promote orderly discussion, anyone wishing to present oral testimony or ask questions relating to the hearing should state your name and present your testimony or questions so it becomes part of the official record. We request you avoid repetition. Once the committee has all the necessary facts, Chairman will close the hearing, allowing no further testimony, and the committee will deliberate and decide in front of the public whether the applicant has met the standards in the ordinance. No additional testimony from the public is allowed during deliberation. However, the committee may question staff for purposes of clarification. After a decision is made, the committee will proceed to the next hearing. Many of the decisions made by the committee are a recommendation to the Marathon County Board of Supervisors, who will take up the matter at a future county board meeting. Please contact staff for more information regarding this county board process. So we'll begin with the first hearing, which is listed on the agenda for 5A1. Steve and Dawn Eisenberg, rural residential to rural estate town of Knowlton, and we'll start with our staff report provided by Garrett. I'll swear you in, Garrett. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Proceed, sir.
All right, this is for Steve and Dawn Eisenberg, petition to rezone land, staff report January 7th, 2025 for the Environmental Resources Committee. The petitioner is Steve and Dawn Eisenberg at 204-617 Harmony Lane, Moseley, Wisconsin, 54455. Property owner is the same. Area to be proposed to be rezoned is located on the east side of the road near the end of Harmony Lane. The petition of Steve and Dawn Eisenberg to amend the General Code of Ordinance for Marathon County, Chapter 17 Zoning Code to rezone lands from RR Rural Residential to RE Rural Estate, described as Lot Number 3D of CSM Number 4390, Document Number 868699, recorded in Volume 16, Page 158, and Lot 4 of CSM Number 4593, Document Number 876443, recorded in Volume 17, Page 61, located in the northwest fractional quarter of Section 19, Township 26 North, Range 7 East, Town of Knowlton. Parcel numbers is listed. Town of Knowlton Town Board met on December 9th, 2024. Marathon County Environmental Resources Committee is meeting today, January 7th, 2025 at 3 p.m. A legal advertisement was published in the Wausau Daily Herald. Notice of the zoning change request was also sent by regular mail to adjacent property owners within 300 feet of the subject property. On December 9th, 2024, the Town of Knowlton Town Board recommended approval to Marathon County's Environmental Resources Committee. Staff recommendation, the rezone meets all the zoning district standards as it relates to size, frontage, access, and dimension. The rezone also appears to be consistent with the purpose and intent of the town's comprehensive plan and as indicated by the town resolution. Based on the information provided above, findings of fact, conclusions of law, and the town's recommendation, it appears the rezone request meets all the rezone criteria and standards for rezoning. Therefore, CPZ staff recommend that the Environmental Resources Committee recommend approval to the Marathon County Board of Supervisors. Should the rezone be approved by Marathon County Board of Supervisors, CPZ staff recommend that the town update its comprehensive plan to reflect the zoning change if applicable.
All right, questions for Garrett? All right, thank you, sir. We'll move on to public testimony, and I'm going to be practical here and just ask the committee. There is a person here that may address 5A1 if the committee has questions for that individual. Are there any questions? All right. So seeing there's no questions from the committee, I'm just going to move right on through public testimony, calling once for each of these. So anybody wishing to speak in favor of item 5A1, please identify yourself at this time. Seeing and hearing none. Anybody wishing to speak opposed to item 5A1, please identify yourself at this time. Seeing and hearing none. Anybody wishing to speak as interested for item 5A1, please identify yourself at this time. Seeing as no one else wishes to testify for this application, I'm now declaring the public hearing on item 5A1 now closed. The committee will now deliberate on the application, apply the standards of the zoning ordinance. I think a motion to approve would be in order here. Would like to make that motion. Supervisor Drabek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll make a motion to approve the rezone of Steve and Don Eisenberg from rural residential to rural estate based on the findings of fact presented by staff and conclusions of law and also the town recommendation. Thank you.
Motion is made. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Schoenborn. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you. All right, moving on to item 5A2, Arthur and Lori Young on behalf of Charles and Linda Young, General Agriculture to Low Density Residential, Town of Green Valley. We're back to Garrett.
All right, this is for Charles and Linda Young, petition to rezone land, staff report January 7th, 2025 for the Environmental Resources Committee. The petitioner is Arthur and Lori Young at 208097 Youngs Valley Lane, Auburndale, Wisconsin, 54412. Property owners are Charles A. Young and Linda E. Young Revocable Trust at 207345 Youngs Valley Lane, Auburndale, Wisconsin, 54412. Area proposed to be rezoned is located just south of the intersection of Diamond Lane and Young Valley Lane. The petition of Arthur and Lori Young on behalf of Charles and Linda Young to amend the General Code of Ordinance for Marathon County Chapter 17 Zoning Code to rezone lands from GA General Agriculture to LDR Low Density Residential described as all of Lot 1 of CSM number 11230 and part of the northwest quarter of the northeast quarter and part of the northeast quarter of the northeast quarter of Section 8 and part of the southwest quarter of the southeast quarter of Section 5, Township 26 North, Range 5 East, Town of Green Valley. Area to be rezoned is described as Lot 1 of the preliminary CSM, parent parcel numbers as shown. The Town of Green Valley Town Board met on December 10th, 2024. Marathon County Environmental Resources Committee is meeting today, January 7th, 2025 at 3 p.m. A legal advertisement was published in the Wausau Daily Herald. Notice of zoning change request was also sent by regular mail to adjacent property owners within 300 feet of the subject property. On December 10th, 2024, the Town of Green Valley Town Board recommended approval to Marathon County's Environmental Resources Committee. Staff recommendation, the rezone meets all the zoning district standards as it relates to size, frontage, access, and dimension. The rezone also appears to be consistent with the purpose and intent of the town's comprehensive plan and as indicated by the town resolution. Based on the information provided above, findings of fact, conclusions of law, and the town's recommendation, it appears the rezone request meets all the rezone criteria and standards for rezoning. Therefore, CPZ staff recommend that the Environmental Resources Committee recommend approval to the Marathon County Board of Supervisors. Should the rezone be approved by Marathon County Board of Supervisors, CPZ staff recommend that the town update its comprehensive plan to reflect the zoning change if applicable.
Questions for Garrett? All right, thank you, Garrett. We'll move on to public testimony, and seeing as I've got nobody signed in on the sign-in sheet for this one, although there may be individuals joining us electronically in person that want to address item 5A2, I'm going to call once for each of these. So firstly, anybody wishing to speak in favor of item 5A2, please identify yourself at this time. Seeing and hearing none. Anybody wishing to speak opposed to item 5A2, please identify yourself at this time. Seeing and hearing none. Anybody wishing to speak as interested for item 5A2, for item 5A2, please identify yourself at this time. All right. Seeing as no one else wishes to testify for item 5A2, I'm now declaring the public hearing on Arthur and Lori Young on behalf of Charles and Linda Young, general agriculture to low-density residential town of Green Valley now closed. The committee will now deliberate on the application, apply its standards to zoning ordinance. I think a motion to approve again would be in order here. Supervisor Kroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will make a motion for the petition of Arthur and Lori Young on behalf of Charles and Linda Young to amend the General Code of Ordinances of Marathon County, Chapter 17, to rezone lands from general agriculture to LDR, low-density residential, based on staff reporting findings of fact and conclusion of law.
Motion's been made. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Schoenborn. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. We are on to 5A3. I guess I would swear you in, Shad. Yeah, so Shad Harvey, CPZ Land Resources Manager, to amend the General Code of Ordinances of Marathon County, Chapter 22, Shoreland, Wetland, and Floodplain Code, and we'll begin with the staff report from Shad. So Shad, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, go ahead.
All right, so in front of you here, we have the list of amendments for our Chapter 22 Shoreland, Wetland, and Floodplain Code. One of the things that we're looking at doing is splitting out our shoreline regulations from our floodplain regulations. This is a recommendation by DNR. Just makes regulating the ordinance a lot clearer. There's less standards that contradict each other if we separate them and have them into separate ordinances. In November, middle of November, we did finally get our approvals from DNR, who approved our drafts. Which there was a link to the actual draft ordinance on our website. And so the first step, they approved it and are good with us moving forward for committee review and adoption. We did send out a memo to all the towns letting them know and offering them a chance to provide comment if they chose. That went out on the 22nd of November. And then we also did hold an open house on December 19th. We did have one township that showed up during the day for that open house, just to get a little bit better understanding of what was going on. So I'll just quickly go through the amendments here. There's really not a whole lot changing if you look at the standards in general. The ordinance does look differently because when we modeled the ordinance, we modeled it after the DNR model ordinance. Just having it look very similar to how the state has theirs, it makes it easier for us. If the state does amend that code, it makes it easier for us to amend ours. So we tried to keep it as close to theirs as possible. So just kind of going, amendment number 1 affects the entire code. Essentially, again, that was splitting the shoreline standards from the floodplain standards into 2 separate codes. Splitting the shoreline and floodplain ordinance into 2 separate code chapters will allow for easier interpretation and enforcement. It will also simplify the amendment process and ensure the county has a compliant shoreline and floodplain ordinance. Number 2, it affects the entire code. There was a lot of rewording to make it consistent with the model ordinance of the DNR. However, it didn't change the intent of the ordinance. It didn't change the requirements of the ordinance. It was just some minor rewordings to make them reflect each other. Amendment 3, again, was the entire code. The DNR and their model ordinance did include some notes. The notes, essentially, they were clarifying notes to help us interpret the intent of the ordinance in which we're enforcing. So it just adds a little bit more clarity to how things are supposed to be interpreted. So those notes did get included into our Chapter 22 proposed ordinance. Number 4, so there's just an addition of some language that was required by the state for illegally created lots. It's a requirement that was put in there based on the Shoreland Model Ordinance. It also will help clarify how we handle illegally created lots. Addition number 5, or amendment number 5, this was a state statute update that we had to incorporate into our Shoreland ordinance. Essentially, it just adds fences as a exempt structure within the Shoreland building setback area. They just have to meet that requirement. That is something we were required to put into our ordinance. Essentially, those are the major things that had happened in the news proposed ordinance. So in the draft, you'll see it's just called Shoreland Code now because the floodplain has been removed out of it. And we'll get into that floodplain section on the next petition. But is there any questions or anything?
Any questions from the committee? Okay. Thank you, Shad. We'll move to, I guess, public testimony, and then we'll go into deliberations. All right. And again, seeing as I didn't have anybody on the sign-up sheet, I'll call once for each of these for item 5A3. Anybody wishing to speak in favor of item 5A3, please identify yourself at this time. Seeing and hearing none. Anybody wishing to speak opposed to item 5A3, please identify yourself at this time. Seeing and hearing none. Anybody wishing to speak as interested for item 5A3, please identify yourself at this time. All right. If no one else wishes to testify for this application, I'm now declaring the public hearing on Shad Harvey, CPZ Land Resources Manager, to amend the General Code of Ordinances for Marathon County, Chapter 22, Shoreland, Wetland, and Floodplain Code now closed. The committee will now deliberate on the application, apply the standards of zoning ordinance. I think as Shad pointed out during his summary report, this seems to be a lot of updating rather than substantial changes, in my opinion, to this. So I think a motion to approve would be in order here. Supervisor Kroll?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will make a motion to approve the General Code of Ordinances for Chapter 22 Shoreland Code as proposed by staff.
Motion is made. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor DeBrew. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to 5A4, we're back to Shad.
All right, very similar to the last one. The intention of this is, again, to split out the floodplain standards from the shoreline. Currently, they exist in the same code chapter. So this one is actually for the adoption of Chapter 27, which doesn't currently exist in our code book, but it's just essentially creating a new chapter for floodplain regulations. Again, very similarly to the shoreline one, there is some minor rewording that had happened. There's not a whole lot in the floodplain standards that have changed since our last one that changed a whole lot. I do have the ones that the additions and subtractions further down here. So Amendment 3, we did have to remove some floodplain insurance map panels from our ordinance. Many of these were from cities and villages that we no longer have jurisdiction in. So those have to come out of our floodplain ordinance. Amendment number 4 was the addition of a letter of map amendment, LOMAR, which is essentially FEMA gives approval to amend the floodplain maps. They don't actually change the map. They just give us a document that says the map has been changed and gives us an area where it has been changed, but we have to adopt that into our ordinance for it to become effective in our county. So that's what that one is in there for. We did add some additional flood studies in. We added a flood study in for the Plover River, an unnamed tributary of the Little Old Plain. a floodplain study for 4 Mile Creek. And then the reason for the addition of those, that allows us to use those flood studies to better help property owners permit projects on their properties. If somebody has a flood study that's done specific for a specific property, or a flood study that's completed, we can only use that to regulate off of on their particular parcel. If we adopt it into our ordinance, however, if that study impacts other properties, we can then use it to benefit other individuals that want to develop in that area. So it helps us identify where the floodplain actually is. And then there was just some additional added language from the DNR model ordinance that adds clarity for how to remove lands from floodplain. We just kind of reworded it to make it more consistent with the DNR model ordinance. Again, Amendment 7 was additional language just to make it consistent with the DNR model ordinance. A lot of these were expanded explanations of what we already currently had in our ordinance. It just makes it a little bit more clear. Amendment 8 was the addition of language for floodplain boundaries. We, again, added this to make it consistent with the DNR model ordinance, and then it adds clarity on determining the actual floodplain boundary for when we're permitting projects in the floodplain. Those are really the big items. Again, it was the main big thing was taking the floodplain regulations and putting them into a separate code chapter. So now they'll be split if this goes through. So.
All right. Any questions for Shad? How does that, real quick, is the only question I had. That one floodplain study is about to be 10 years old. Is that data still relevant to the questions that the department gets with floodplains?
Yep. So there are several flood studies that have occurred back in the day. Every one of these flood studies, the DNR has to relook at and make sure it's still valid before it goes into our ordinance. So they did do a review of that. But there are several flood studies that are still valid that are from a while back, even if FEMA came out with an additional one, as long as they're revalidated by FEMA and DNR, they're still good. We don't generally include all of those in our ordinance just because it would be very cumbersome. We try and include ones that would help multiple people. If there's a lot of development in an area and there's a flood study, we like to include that because it makes our permitting a little bit more accurate. But that's essentially why that one was allowed to go in there. Yep.
Thank you. Marilyn?
Are there any penalties if they don't comply with the ordinance?
So, yeah, we take them through the stepped enforcement process. If somebody doesn't comply with the floodplain regulations, we work as a zoning team to try and get them back into compliance, whether that's they have to get an additional flood study to prove that they didn't cause a rise in the floodplain, or we also, there's other options, like sometimes the only option is they have to remove what they installed and put it back to pre-existing elevations. But we do make sure that they get the property back into compliance.
Are there any fines if they don't comply?
There can potentially be fines, yes.
That's listed somewhere else?
Yeah, so we have a schedule of deposits for floodplain citations.
Thank you.
But Shad, the first step in that stepped enforcement process is not to issue a fine.
Correct. We do everything in our power to get it resolved before that point. That's generally, that is the last resort when we're not making any progress or we don't have any cooperation. We use that as a tool to try and get them to cooperate with us.
Sure. Okay. Anything else for Shad? All right. Thank you, sir. I'll restate what I said for item 5A3. I've got nobody else signed up here, so I'll call once for each of these. Anybody wishing to speak in favor of item 5A4, please identify yourself at this time. Seeing and hearing none. Anybody wishing to speak opposed to item 5A4, please identify yourself at this time. Seeing and hearing none. Anyone wishing to speak as interested for item 5A4, please identify yourself at this time. Seeing as no one else wishes to testify for this application, I'm now declaring the public hearing for Shad Harvey, Conservation Planning and Zoning Land Resources Manager for the adoption of Chapter 27 Floodplain Code into the General Code of Ordinances for Marathon County. Now closed. The committee will now deliberate on the application, apply the standards of the zoning ordinance. Again, with the update of splitting these apart, I think motion to approve here would be in order, similar to the last one. Anybody like to make that motion? Supervisor Kroll?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to make a motion to approve Marathon County Code of Ordinances, brand new Chapter 27 floodplain code as presented today by staff.
Motion is made. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Drabek. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. All right, 5B, we've got nothing. 5C, review and possible recommendations to the county board for its consideration. 1, Marathon County Assembly's Ordinance 1204 draft. Lori, why don't you kick things off?
Okay. Well, I know you would love it if I went through the presentation again. I won't. Last month, we did go through the presentation of the changes that have been made since we last met in the spring on the 12.04 Assembly's Ordinance. With the ERC, you guys did ask us to seek further feedback from the dairy breakfast associations, and we did have a couple people give public comment here today on that we did actually meet with some of those dairy breakfast representatives in December. I think the biggest concern they did have was the threshold that has been identified in the new draft related to it applying at that level of 3,000 attendees. That is something that they said some of the dairy breakfasts do plan for. I think they mentioned that they're usually getting attendance more in the level of 2,000, 2,200 to 2,700, but they do sometimes plan for up to 3,000 attendees. So that was brought forth in those discussions as a concern. From the work group perspective, I will say the threshold was talked about a lot over the months when the work group met. The 3,000 was chosen because that is the number, predominantly because that is the number that is in the existing ordinance. Another number of 5,000 as a threshold was also discussed by the work group. That is in Wisconsin Administrative Code for the Department of Health Services, that when a special event has attendees of 5,000 or more, that they have a mass casualty plan, which includes a lot of elements that our Assembly's ordinance also has. So that was another number that was discussed by the work group. I think I see Sheriff Billup in the back. I think he could speak to his opinion too about whether or not that number, that threshold could be taken up. I think it's something from CPZ's perspective that we wouldn't have concern with taking that number up. The other thing that's changed since last month is just something that was brought to our attention by the Highway Department this morning regarding the parking language. So I think initially in the parking section, we had something about providing sufficient parking for attendees. We did actually mean for the number of people on site, so we're not saying you have to have 10,000 parking spaces if you're having an event of 10,000. And they did also provide us further clarification on best guidance for parking design. And I believe Shad gave you all a one-page handout of what that diagram would look like. So that comes from the Highway Department, just saying that when people are designing parking for events, that this is the best guidance for how they set that up. So I think the choice before the standing committees this month is we are looking for the standing committees to take up the discussion and take action on where 12.04 goes. As a reminder, it does exist on our books right now, so we're asking the committees to consider probably one of three recommendations, and if there's more, you guys will tell me, but I'm looking at the lawyers on the left. But I think the three to consider would be, one, making a recommendation to county board to repeal 12.04, two, making a recommendation to the county board to take up the draft and repeal and replace the existing 12.04 with the draft as we presented, or make a recommendation to county board to repeal and replace with a draft with amendments that you might suggest as well. Did I cover that correctly?
So then, I guess I have a question before opening up to the committee. Is this a part of the recommendation before the committee
But
today?
ask that you include, like, in
Okay.
your motion, that you would include that parking diagram amendment, because it just came to our attention this morning, so.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay. Questions from the committee, comments? Supervisor Drabek?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is this parking deal, is that for like, okay, people have their fields that they're parking in the farmers' fields and stuff for dairy breakfast? Is this what's recommended there? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that recommendation came from the highway department on like the general space that's required for certain types of parking. So if they're planning on having two-way traffic a parking lot in the field, or if they're planning on parking diagonally, it's just kind of the highway department's recommendations for the space that's needed for each parking space.
Thank you.
So would this language be, I guess I'm a little bit confused. So would the language that's being recommended related to the parking, is this a requirement, or is it a recommendation to the person that wants to hold an event? So who's being recommended this?
So the language that's in there, the applicant has to address parking. So that's because they're on-street parking, they have to have enough on-site parking or a site dedicated to parking. So the diagram below is kind of options for how you could lay out in the space you would need for each type of parking. So just to make sure that they have adequate space and maneuverability to have safe parking on site.
I think there's got to be some additional language there, because my concern is that somebody's going to see these diagrams, immediately think that this is the gospel and they have to abide by it. At least that's the impression I guess, is refer to the figure below for detailed parking size requirements. I think it's good to have charts, or not charts, but graphics in here demonstrating this. I think that's fine, but I think it just should be clear that this is sort of a demonstration and not, you shall have forms of parking like this. Does that make sense?
I do understand what you're saying, and just for clarity too, I know the previous version we had used the same language in our 17 zoning code, which gave a dimension of a parking. However, that definition or diagram, the highway department gave us this new one. So we're going to be working on updating that too during a separate update in 17. But so the guidance here essentially, and I can let Garrett, I know he'd talked with highway department as well. But so essentially what's listed here would be the options for the parking layout is what it's saying. So if you're doing double road aisle parking, the dimensions here would be essentially what you would need on site to accommodate that parking. If you did single row and an aisle, those would be the dimensions you would at least need to reserve for parking. Is that?
Well, is there a way to reword that last sentence to refer to the figures below for example parking size layouts? Recommendations, what it?
To add that recommendation, so it doesn't have to be that, but these are some recommendations or options. Not required.
Well, the requirement is the one parking size for every 4 individuals, correct?
Correct.
Is there a requirement beyond that, like, there must be this much space in between cars or something like that? Is there anything like that?
So I think part of this too is with this diagram, and the way it's written right now in the draft that's in front of you. We use these dimensions to identify whether or not there's enough square footage in the area that they have identified that there's enough parking there.
Sure.
So basically what they're doing by using this new diagram provided to us by the highway department is they're saying we're going to park vehicles in this manner. So these are the dimensions we're going to have, and this is how we'll calculate the square footage to make sure that they have adequate space on that lot. Because we don't want them to say that, yeah, we have enough space for 8,000 cars, but they only have enough space for 6,000. And then now we have an issue with overflow on streets and there's no alternatives. So I would think that we would want to have the discussion of making one of these options a requirement for them to choose. They're able to choose which requirement that they want to meet based on their event and where they're going to be parking and how their the parking area is set up. But it seems like when I spoke to Kevin Lang at the highway department, he did not feel that the current thoroughfare distance, especially for the single road and aisle, which is in the top left of that diagram, and our in the ordinance right now, it's identified as 12. He did not feel that that was an adequate size for that. So these should in fact be requirements that they have to choose these in order to guarantee that there's enough room for maneuverability.
Okay.
That was Kevin's biggest concern.
Okay, so. Yeah, go ahead, Mike, sorry.
No, you're fine. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just some thoughts on this. I think if we have the first sentence, which indicates adequate parking must be provided to accommodate the maximum number with a minimum of one parking space for every 4 individuals, it would make sense for me that the figures be included in like the application materials as guidance for the applicant, but not as part of the ordinance, unless you truly are deciding, yes, we're going to require a specific parking layout, but that really seems in the weeds for an ordinance. We really just want a parking plan that's compliant. I don't think, want to micromanage to that degree how parking is being handled.
So I apologize if I have my back to the committee. I'm trying to sort this out real quick. So based on what, I would agree with Corporation Counsel, but based on, and I'm not going to expect you to speak for Kevin Langarrett, but based on what you're saying, it sounds like Kevin is concerned with the, what did you say, the 12-foot thoroughfare or something like that?
Right.
It sounds like Kevin might be recommending the committee actually look at something like this and say, hey, we want these dimensions.
Right.
Okay.
And it doesn't have to be, I suppose the specific dimensions or the specific layout
Sure.
isn't, as far as how they set it up, isn't always, I don't want to say it's not important because it is. I'm just trying to figure out a way how we would calculate the amount of square footage that is needed based on the amount of attendees they're hoping to have. Because we're saying 4 people per vehicle. And if you have 4,000 people, you need 1,000 parking spaces. So, based on these dimensions, some sort of dimensions. It doesn't have to lay out this way, but maybe we just identify a set of dimensions for the parking spaces and then the thoroughfare space, and they can set it up however they want to meet that.
Which, the only reason I bring this up is because I think someone's going to see these diagrams and go, well, we can't replicate this or whatever.
Right.
So then I think the ordinance has got to be really clear that this is the expectation, this is the requirement, right?
Or
So-
the recommendation, whichever you
Or
guys.
the recommendation,
committee
which
chooses.
I do like Corp Council's idea of possibly including that in the application materials as guidance, but I've hogged the mic enough. I'm going to talk to the committee and see what their thoughts are. So Supervisor Drabek, did you have your hand up?
Sort of, yes.
No? Go ahead, you do.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that's a good for a recommendation. I wouldn't want to make it, like a have-to thing, but also, my concern is the weather, when you're dealing with farm fields, doesn't always cooperate, and all of a sudden, you can have a little bit of mud, and so they need to be able to change what they're doing. Maybe, I've seen them where they bus them in because they can't park there, so there's got to be other options for them as well. So.
Supervisor DeBrew.
I wouldn't think you'd want them a lot smaller than that, would you? Because the whole purpose of this must be to keep cars from parking on the roads, probably. And if you go much smaller than that, you're not going to get, I think they look pretty realistic to me. So it seems like maybe if nothing else, have some minimums, because it takes just so much room to park a vehicle and back it out. There's different sized vehicles, but, because you don't want to get too small of an area, and then you got them parking on the street, so.
Anybody else for parking? Because we've got kind of 2 things that I think we want to talk about today. One is parking and the other one is the size threshold. I think those are the 2 areas we're going to focus on. Okay, we'll circle back to that, but why don't we have some discussion about the numbers? So, do you have something with that too, Supervisor Drabek, or?
I did, if we're going back to the.
Okay, that's
back to
fine.
the original, or,
Yeah,
okay.
that's fine.
All right, want me to, yeah, I think the number should be higher than 3,000? Is that what you're referring to?
So there was, the reason I bring that up is because, first of all, you were the first one to raise your hand. Second is that there were some people under public comment today that talked about the 3,000 to 5,000. And staff even brought it up in their report that, the 3,000 was a carryover from the prior ordinance, and the 5,000 would be less arbitrary because it would be rooted into state statutes. That's where that comes from. So it sounds like 3,000 might still be okay for the dairy breakfast groups, but to me, I'd rather see the issue resolved by raising it to 5,000. That way we don't have to worry about this. So that's what I would be in favor of, to raise it to 3,000, but I want to hear from the rest of the committee too in regards to attendance. Supervisor Kroll?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd be curious to hear what Sheriff Billup has to say about this. So if it's okay with the committee, I'd like to hear his words.
No objection from me. Looks like no objection from the committee, so Sheriff Billup.
Yeah, no, everyone knows I'm not good at math, Lance. I would say that I agree that moving that to the 5,000 aligns with what the DHS codes are, that are the recommendations that are coming down. And what we've found with many of the events that we have in the county is, yeah, you're going to have your dairy breakfasts that are pushing that 3,000. You don't have many that are going to pop in between that 3 and that 5 that are going to make it that big of a difference. So that's really not where the concern comes in. It's when we're starting to talk about, I'll use an example of Farm Technology Days, and they are probably one of the most organized groups I've ever had the pleasure of working with. They're already doing it and getting it done. The concern is that if we get groups that come in here who are, this is their first year, they're a startup, and they're going to go big, we need to have plans in place. So I think the 5,000 is a realistic number, and I don't have serious concern with it.
Thank you. All right. Well, I'm just going to look at, I'll just ask right now, not as a formal vote, but sort of just to gauge consensus. Is anybody really married to that 3,000 number? Okay. So I'm going to make a note that when we get to our recommendation here today that, I would essentially be looking for somebody to make an amendment to change that 3 to 5, just so we're clear. Okay. Well, that was easier than I thought. That's good. Let's jump back to, Supervisor Kroll.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Chair, I just wanted to ask a follow-up question maybe for staff. How many events do we have that are exceeding that 3,000 per person event here in the county?
Well, I think
per year?
what Sheriff Billup was saying, I don't know that we know of any that are in the 3 to 5 really. So it's the dairy breakfasts are kind of hovering around that 2 to 3 sometimes, and then we go up to over 10 probably is where we are with like the steam show, which now has a conditional use permit, and the Balloon Fest we believe will easily be over 10,000. Can you guys think of any other events? What about the Farm Technology Days? Do we know?
That one is going to be well over.
Yeah, it will be.
All right. So we are going to, like I said, just make a note of that, and we'll circle back to that before we give the recommendation. Oh, one other thing I want to bring up. This is going to be in front of infrastructure and public safety?
Correct.
Okay. So ERC are going to be, we're the first ones to have a crack at this. I have a hunch that, I shouldn't say I have a hunch, but I would just hope that if someone like staff, which I'm sure you're going to be at public safety and infrastructure, just please say ERC brought forth these recommendations. That way we just keep it similar throughout the committees. You're smart people. I'm sure you would have done that anyway, but I just want to make that clear. So, okay. So let's go back to parking. So I think there's two options in front of the committee. One's going to require more discussion and I think a lot more deliberate thought regarding whether or not we want to get down into the nitty-gritty regarding the dimensions of vehicles and all that. And I really don't want to do that because I don't think that's the role of this ordinance. I would rather see something like keeping the language in 3.1 the same, but strike out that last sentence and then include some language in the application that refers to those charts that are on the page right now saying that, hey, these are the, recommended layouts for parking. Anybody objecting to that? No?
Mr.
Okay.
Chair, I don't.
You made the recommendation.
Yeah, I don't have an
Mike,
objection
You should be
to
okay
it.
with this.
No, actually, I just wanted to say in support of that.
Okay.
I actually, as I'm thinking about this, if we get too technical and try to require specific dimensions, if we think back to the reason we started to look at 12.04, because there are constitutional concerns with how it restricts free speech and free assembly. I don't know that a court would look favorably on a restriction on assembly based on they don't have the right parking dimensions. So if we instead use, as you said, Mr. Chair, leave it as the maximum number of attendees and the minimum of one parking space for every 4, and then let the plan have specific examples, or the application have examples that folks can use but not specifically require it in our ordinance, it's much more defensible.
Okay. Okay. Use those as examples in the application. Okay, cool. So that would be my preference. Any objection from the committee there? All right. This is the committee. So there's a couple of people raising their hands in the back. My past practice as chair has been that this is the committee's time. The public had an opportunity to address us during public comment. So that's why that's the case. So those two items, I think we just got through. So I think the way that this is going to work is somebody would move to recommend this to the county board, and then after that, we're going to make, we'll call it an omnibus amendment and include those two items together. We'll pass that, then we'll go back up to the main motion, we'll pass that, and we'll be done with this for today.
Chair, just
So-
to clarify, but they do need to make a recommendation to repeal. Is that correct? The existing or not?
So
That isn't included as part of the agenda for today.
I
but-
think, Mr. Chair, if you proceed like you just outlined, I think that's fine.
Okay.
Okay.
The county board's ultimate resolution that they're going to consider is going to have the repeal language in it, because that's what you're going to have to do at the county board level. But at this level, you're recommending language to be considered by the county board. So I think the way you
Okay.
laid it out made sense to me.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you. So would anybody like to make a recommendation to approve? We have to start there, the ordinance. Or do we need more discussion? That's kind of what's in front of us here. Supervisor Schoenborn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One quick question. Like, with this all detailed out, could it be possible that, could we have outline how much area we would need for 1,000 cars or 500 cars or 2,000 cars or whatever? So it'd be make it a little bit easier. Do we need X amount of acres? I don't know all that math equation, but I mean, it would make it a lot easier when somebody's looking and asking us, hey, Joe Smith, he has a field, he's got 80 acres, and John Doe's got 60 acres. If we had at least something laid out that, would give the proximity of what they do need for vehicles, it makes it easier on their part and also on our part, so that we don't have, actually we just have 6 cars on each diagram here. I'm just throwing that out there, but that's, to make it easy. I mean, all we gotta do is the math and the little bit of more legwork, and that it's laid out.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that's a good point. I would think that's something that could be included in among these examples on the application. I guess I'd look to staff if that's something that is feasible. Yeah.
Yep, I think that's something that could be done pretty easily.
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. All right. Other discussion? Oh, Supervisor Drabeck.
Thank you. So in other words, then that would be how many cars, like per acre, per type of parking? Is that what I'm hearing? Okay, thank you.
All right. Supervisor Kroll?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a follow-up ask. Do we need to refer anywhere to section 17.503, the parking? It's the parking standards. Would there be any value in just listing that as one of the standards, just like refer to this ordinance?
Does that bleed into the concerns that you had, Corporation Counsel, regarding the minimum requirements and how that could impede an event from taking place?
Right. I think importantly, we have to remember in this case, this is a public safety ordinance, not a zoning ordinance. So I think bleeding the lines between the two is where you run into trouble.
Okay. Well, like I said, like in regards to Supervisor Schoenborn's point, I think on the application, I think that's something that the staff could do to assist them with getting an idea of what they would need. Yeah. All right. Marilyn?
We all know that a pickup truck takes up more room than a car.
I think so. I mean, I used to drive a GMC Sierra single cab short box, and I don't know how much bigger that is than my current car, but.
Also, they have adequate parking. I mean, that's the main thing that we're concerned about, you know, and if they know they're gonna have so many people, they've gotta figure out how much space they need to do. You know.
About 27 to 30 vehicles per acre.
Yeah. I don't think we can micromanage.
No, and I don't think anybody in this room wants to have that job, so. Okay. Other discussion? If not, like I said, we can recommend approval and then we can make those amendments and then keep this going forward. So, other discussion, or I'd look for a motion? Corporation Counsel.
Sorry, I'm just monopolizing time today. A thought would be moving to approve with the amendments you've discussed.
Oh.
That might be a little bit of cheating, but you're at the committee level.
Okay.
If there's consensus on those amendments, I think then you would save yourselves a vote and a step.
Okay, yeah, that streamlines the process. So would anybody like to make a motion to approve with the two amendments that we previously discussed relating to the parking and relating to the number of attendees? Anybody like to make the motion? Supervisor Kroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to make a motion to approve 12.04, the ordinance, with the amendments we had stated regarding parking and the size of the event.
All right, motion's been made. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Schoenborn. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. This will go to infrastructure and public safety, and we'll see what gets done there. All right, and thank you to the individuals that spoke under public comment. All right. We are on to D, review and possible action. 1, updates the zoning fee schedule for floodplain projects, conservation planning and zoning.
Oh, never mind. Just gonna-
Okay. All right, so we recently just, as you guys are aware, recently just updated our fees at the county board level. But we did want to add a fee into our zoning fee schedule. It's in blue here, it's for floodplain approval. Generally, our floodplain approvals, the fees kind of inside our shoreland alteration permit, which is our larger permit fee. It historically was $400, but I believe it went up to $420 now with the increase that we did this year. However, we've ran into several projects where they don't require that shoreline alteration permit. So there really wasn't any recouping from our side on the floodplain work that we did. So we specifically wanted to include a floodplain fee for situations like that. just to make sure that our department is recouping our costs on those projects, looking into the floodplain. Additionally, now with the recommendations, if it gets approved at county board, there'll be 2 separate ordinances, which will then have 2 separate hard cards associated with it. So it'll be kind of its own separate permit. This fee is consistent with what other counties in the area are charging for just a flat floodplain approval. So that's essentially what we're asking, is just to add the $50 floodplain approval fee.
Any questions for Shad? And the $50 is based on what other counties have charged, and of course, staff resources.
Correct.
Okay. All right, I think a motion to approve here would be in order. Would you like to make that motion? Oh, sure, Supervisor Kroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would this have to have a 2/3 approval to get, at the county board level, to get this approved?
So the zoning fee schedule is actually set by this committee. So if this committee passes it, it essentially will go into effect.
Great, thank you.
All right, other questions? All right, anybody like to make a motion? Supervisor Drabek?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll make a motion to approve the floodplain approval amount, $50.
Motion is made. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor DeBrew. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. We are on to 6, educational presentations, outcome monitoring reports, and committee discussion. A, department updates, conservation planning and zoning, park rec and forestry, conservation planning and zoning. 1, proposed winter spreading requirements in Marathon County. Who would like to start?
Kirsty's gonna.
Kirsty, whenever you're ready.
And Matt.
Oh, Kirsty and Matt.
Hello, everyone. Matt is going to just pass out handouts. Although you do have this in your packet, we thought that it would be helpful to have a place where you can take notes on the same slide packet, that slide deck that's in your packet, because we just really want to encourage you as you listen to the conversation, just to have an open mind as we have this discussion today, and just know that anything that we propose to you today certainly can be modified, edited. We absolutely plan on working with the committee and integrating your comments and public comments into what we will hopefully be going forward with. So since this does really get into the nitty-gritty of manure chat with you here today, that's why we thought we'd give you some notes pages to write on. And you can certainly feel free to, raise your hand and ask questions as Matt and I go through this with you. And if it would be easier for you, perhaps you could even make a note on what part you have a question about, and we can come back to that at the end as well. So thank you in advance for your patience and your open mind as we do discuss some proposed winter spreading requirements in Marathon County today. So I'll just kind of give a brief recap and introduction, and then my coworker, Matt Repking, will come and go through the details of our proposed changes to the ordinance. And then I'll kind of close it out and also provide a few more details on why some of the areas are shifting a little bit from what we had talked about previously. So just a very quick recap. We last talked with you in November at that ERC meeting, and we really got into detail about why we need some type of modification to the current winter manure spreading behaviors that we're seeing in Marathon County. We gave you loads upon loads of data and examples showing that, we are 110% confident that if we can reduce the winter spreading that's occurring in Marathon County, County, we are going to eliminate or reduce the largest load of phosphorus that is entering our surface waters in Marathon County. So there's been research done to show that we would see about a 360% improvement in phosphorus reductions going into our surface waters if we were to modify our winter spreading. So at the November meeting, ERC all concurred that you would like for conservation staff to start really developing a solid set of ideas around winter spreading restrictions and permitting. And you kind of decided that you liked the model of having some type of permit and also having some type of restriction worked into the ordinance as well. And so just to summarize a little bit of a change from what we had talked about this fall. So we were originally talking about focusing our efforts in just 303D phosphorus impaired watersheds. That number is just a designation that the US EPA Environmental Protection Agency comes up with for their designation. So we just talked about doing this in our impaired watersheds, which we know is most of western Marathon County. You'll hear today that we would like you to consider perhaps moving forward with more of a county-wide implementation instead of just impaired watersheds. Another pivot that we are moving with is away from the segregation of farms by animal units or the size of the farm. So we were previously really focusing on specific numbers, which we're still working that in a little bit, but you'll see kind of some of the changes that we want to offer for your consideration. And then we spent quite a bit of time talking about buffers at our last couple of meetings. I love that we are such an enthusiastic group of people about buffers. That's a very, very good thing. And we're really excited about that as well. But we think for the sake of simplicity and, implementing changes, we think perhaps including buffers into ordinance revisions should perhaps come at a future date. That does not mean we're going to stop selling buffers like crazy in this county. Like, we still firmly believe that, everyone should have one, and we're going to still keep preaching the gospel of buffers in Marathon County, but we are recommending removing that from this current ordinance revision. So with that, I will turn it over to Matt, and he'll go through some of the details with you.
So essentially we divided it into 5 groups. We'll kind of go through group by group. The first 2 groups are permitted farms, one permitted by the DNR and then the other permitted by Marathon County. So for CAFO farms, the large farms, 1,000 animal units, we have 14 of them in Marathon County. They already have pretty strict winter spreading restrictions. They're not allowed to spread liquid manure in the winter. So there would be no additional requirements from Marathon County. There's been several CAFO farms that already like the ideas that we've proposed initially about evening the playing field and having more uniform regulations as far as winter spreading goes. The second group is the livestock sighting farms. These are, if you remember, the permitted farms through Marathon County. They're usually 500 animal units or more, but less than 1,000 animal units. So we have a number of them that are in that, 900 to 999 animal units. So they're borderline being CAFO is really close. So for this group, what our suggestion is to ban liquid and slurry manure applications during frozen or snow-covered ground periods. So, during our winter periods. Would allow for emergency applications. Sometimes you run into things, but those groups, if they did have emergency applications, would need to come through our office to get approval and work with us and their agronomist to pick the fields that have the lowest potential for runoff, but also the justification as to why they would be spreading manure. When we looked at these farms for what they have, all of them have long-term manure storage. So when we look at them, this is just kind of a breakdown of it. They have, the majority of them have more than 6 months of storage. Now that group that's in that 120 to 180, they're right at 150 days of storage. So, they're looking at about 5 months of storage. Generally in Wisconsin, kind of the magic number for CAFO farms is 180 days of storage, so 6 months. You talk to some of the CAFO guys, they like to have a little bit more than that, but that's kind of the bare minimum that's set by DNR and 243. There isn't a requirement for the livestock sighting farms to have a certain number of days of storage, but 150 days of storage would be close to getting them through that winter period. But you can see from kind of this graph here that the majority of them have 180 days or greater. So there's only 2 farms that fall below that, and the other 16 or 14 are above that actually. So why aren't we breaking it up by animal units? When we had a discussion and we thought it would be more efficient to actually look at just farms, all farms together, and even the playing field across the board. When you start picking farms apart by animal units, it can become very challenging. You know, you're looking at nutrient management plans, trying to see where they're at. You're going to have farms that are on the border between groups, so then where do they fall? Maybe one year they're below, the next year they're above. And really, at the end of the day, when we're looking at manure applications, it's not really the size of the farm it's how they manage their manure and where they're spreading it. So we want people to make the best decisions possible where they're placing that manure. One other thing to mention is that a lot of the case studies that we've looked at in our state and other states have shown in February and March, that's really our critical time of when a lot of this is running off and the highest potential is for those losses. So the next group is a group of farms, this is our third group, that received grant money for long-term storage from the DNR Targeted Resource Management Grant or a notice of discharge. So these farms were provided cost share funding to install long-term manure storage and not winter spread. So they've either had issues in the past with stacking manure where they've had a runoff issue. They have limited amount of acres that they can winter apply on. So these farms have some type of challenge that goes along with their farm, and that's why they were provided funds. This is already required for them under state statute that they don't apply manure in the winter. So what we would be doing is really adding this to our ordinance to document it and to solidify it, because at times it is challenging to find where that code is. Again, we would allow for emergency applications, and we have worked with some of these farms on emergency applications in the past. So with those first 3 groups, we kind of have them all laid out. Now the last groups are pretty much all the other farms that winter spread manure that do not fall into one of the categories that I already discussed. What we would be proposing is that during this winter time period, no manure or no liquid or slurry manure would be applied during February and March, so a ban during those time periods. Again, like I mentioned in the past and like we've discussed in the past, these are our high-risk periods. And a winter spreading plan would be required for all these farms. Now, when we look at these farms, we can essentially break them into 2 groups. The first group would be anybody that has a nutrient management plan. They already are required to do a winter spreading plan as part of their nutrient management plan. So they would be required to follow that, and there would be no additional winter spreading permit required. The second group would be a farm that does not have a nutrient management plan. And in Marathon County, about 40% of farms don't have nutrient management plans. So what we would be asking is that we would require a winter spreading permit. We haven't determined a cost yet. The permit, what we would suggest, would be good for 4 years. Fields would need to be submitted to Marathon County annually, either in the early or the fall or the early winter before any applications are applied. And hopefully this group would transition more into the group that would have the nutrient management plan. So they would have a winter spreading plan by having a nutrient management plan.
Is that all farms or just animal operations?
All farms that would be applying manure.
cars that don't have a nutrient management plan, well, aren't they all required?
They're all
Bring that?
required to, but the way state statute is written is if they don't fall into one of the categories that requires them to have a plan, so either manure storage, cost share, CAFOs, livestock sighting. If they kind of fall through all those programs, then they either have to be offered cost share, or if the land had a plan on it long-term, then we can require them to have a plan, so. And again, with this group, we would allow for emergency applications. You know, we need to have that flexibility for people that if something comes up and they need to apply manure, work with them on getting it out there.
All right. So one question that you may immediately have is, why are we pivoting towards more county-wide implementation instead of focusing on our phosphorus-impaired watersheds? So we thought that this visual would be helpful to you. This is a 2024 map of all the dairy farms in Marathon County. We got this data from Wisconsin DATCAP, Department of Ag. We have 348 total dairy farms in Marathon County. Of these 348, 173 of those dairy farms do have manure storage. Within that, some of the categories that Matt touched based on, 14 of those are CAFO farms, over 1,000 animal units. 18 of those are livestock sighting farms that are between 500 to 999 animal units. So if 173 do have manure storage, that means that 175 of those dairy farms do not have manure storage. With that, one important item that we have previously discussed with the committee is that we do have at minimum 94 idle manure storages in Marathon County in our tracking system. So, of course, there are some that we still do not have on our radar, so there could potentially be more out there. And of course, we know that there are also idle manure storages in the borderlands, in surrounding counties as well that could likely be potentially utilized. So just, with current data, we know that countywide we have about 65,000 dairy cows and about 145,000 total cattle. So this does give a good visual representation, though, that the majority of our dairy farms are still on the western side, so we would still mostly be dealing with farms impacted in our phosphorus-impaired watersheds. About 80% of the dairies are in 3 key watersheds. So the Big O Plain, Little O Plain, and the Rib River watersheds. And as we really dug into the research and looked at what other states are doing, we became concerned that if we do focus on our impaired watersheds and try to improve them, that we are concerned that some of our other watersheds that are not impaired could be heavily impacted. So, for example, someone who can't winter spread manure in one of these, let's just say like the Big O Plain watershed, they may have land that they can rent over on the east side of the county that is, that's an outstanding watershed. So that we also have watersheds that are so good that the EPA has declared them as an outstanding water resource. And so, we don't want to try to solve one problem and create another. So, through lots of deliberation, we are shifting our recommendation that this would be a county-wide implementation as well. We also feel that at the end of the day, it's just going to be so much more efficient and simpler administration of rules. And that goes for county staff, for operators, for state agencies that are our partners. There wouldn't be any biased regulations for operators as well. So the more we thought about it, people are going to have to be thinking, am I over the invisible watershed line here? It's like you almost have to have the geographic watershed lines memorized. And so it does become very complicated very quickly. Other Wisconsin counties that we have looked to for examples of how things are being done related to winter spreading rules, all of those counties have gone forward doing countywide implementation. So some of the other example counties that we talked about at our fall meetings, all of them are countywide, not delineated by watershed. And the last point, like I mentioned earlier, we have outstanding resources such as the Plover River area. I think we all know that that's great trout fishing. So another key point that we've talked about in previous meetings was we really do want this to potentially be a delayed implementation period, just to give everyone time and resources to do what they need to be in a comfortable spot to be in compliance with our animal waste ordinance. And so as staff, we felt that a delayed implementation period, somewhere probably between 3 to 5 years, would likely be the sweet spot that you would need to help the 170 or so dairy farms that do not have manure storage as well. So it gives them a chance to work with neighboring farms, whether it's renting manure storage that's currently not being used, work with a state agency to get a grant or funding or financing for manure storage, or just find another solution, to manage the applications in February and March. Of course, we would anticipate holding many educational and outreach meetings as well to keep, everyone up to date with upcoming changes. One thing that we thought would be neat to look to in the future, or perhaps as we get further down this road of coming to a decision, using either a new grant that we would apply for or an existing source of funding from the county to perhaps offer cost share to farms during this delayed implementation period, something very small, even if it's 1 cent a gallon per gallon of manure or $50 an acre for farms that don't have long-term storage. And that would likely give farms just a couple $1,000s a year, but that's about how much they would need to likely rent manure storage from someone that has a pit that they could use. So that's one way that the county could play a role in just easing that transition as well. And then lastly, I just wanted to loop back to the buffers here. We just want to reiterate, we absolutely heard your concern for lack of buffers in the county as well, knowing that a lot of runoff into surface water is because there is not a blade of grass between the runoff and our surface water. So we know that having buffers on the ground would really also be extremely impactful. So we are committed to making sure this is a continued priority for our conservation department and for our county. And in 2024, we did have 30 acres of buffers installed through our Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. That's the CREP acronym you see there. 30 acres is a huge amount of buffers if you consider the fact that many of those are, like 30 to 50 feet wide. They're, relatively narrow buffers along waterways. So to get it up to 30 acres, we're going to chalk that up as a victory for 2024 and celebrate that success that we had with that. We want to see that number continue to grow every year, though. If you do by chance feel very strongly that you would like to incorporate the use of buffers into this ordinance, of course, we will support you. We'll run with you with that. So we're not saying it's not possible. It certainly is possible. It is just a lot of change in a small amount of time. So we just wanted to offer that to you for your consideration to perhaps do something related to buffers at a future time. So just to kind of close here by giving you some insight into what steps would be needed if we were to amend our ordinance. So when a county like our county wants to have an ordinance regarding environmental regulations that are more strict than our current state standards, which is what these proposed changes would be, you do need to get approval from either the Wisconsin DNR or the Wisconsin Department of Ag, so either agency, and that is in state statutes. It says that they must approve it. And so we have already preliminary met with the DNR, the folks that would need to help approve this at the DNR, and we've discussed next steps with them. We're not intimidated by the next steps. We feel like it would be certainly doable. And let me also just say that the DNR is super pumped for us that we're even considering this. They are very excited they think it would be great if Marathon County did go this route. They wanted to communicate that they would help support us and hold our hands along the way. And I was even able to go to a state meeting at the DNR headquarters in Madison the other day, and one of the very high up people in the DNR, never met the guy before. He's just one step down from the secretary of the DNR. He said, I've been hearing what's going on in Marathon County, and we are very excited with what you guys are considering. So I thought that was just super cool that, that they know what we have going on. So we can submit our draft ordinance updates to the DNR or DACAP after ERC approves. So it essentially would be after the committee approves, but before the county board would approve, just to see what their thoughts are. So in an ideal world, what would happen now is that ERC would provide initial suggestions at today's meeting, and then if everyone feels okay about the direction that's given today, then we would feel comfortable providing you an actual draft amended ordinance here in early 2025, so maybe 2 months or so. And then we come back to you with that draft. You would look at it, and we, of course, would get a chance to make changes as well. I can't reiterate enough how much we're committed to having public meetings. We've already been talking with the Marathon County Farm Bureau, Marathon County Farmers Union, and other groups. We know we want to meet with the Big O Plains Citizens Organization. We want to have, at minimum, probably 2 or 3 outreach meetings that we put in the newspaper and hold at places like Country Air and libraries. So we want to give ample opportunity for public comment as well. And then after we get that public comment and edits, of course, we would incorporate that in working together with ERC. So thank you for listening to some of our suggestions. We're eager to hear, your thoughts on all of this. And it's just really exciting to have these discussions with you as well, knowing that so much of what we're discussing here today is really, really impacting, not just Marathon County, but it's also impacting all of our neighbors downstream in the Wisconsin River. Western Marathon County, the phosphorus levels that are coming through the Big O Plain River system are currently contributing about 30% of the entire phosphorus load in the entire Wisconsin River system. I believe we've talked about that before. So we are a huge contributor to a problem that many of our neighbors and state agencies are truly just begging for us to do more about. And so we have a wonderful opportunity to work together to come up with the solution on what we want our future to look like here in Marathon County.
All right. Thank you, Kirsty, and thank you, Matt. Any questions from the committee regarding the content of the presentation, feedback? Now would be the time to provide so. Tom?
Thanks, Kirsty. That was great. I think personally you nailed it. What you have here looks really good. The only suggestion I would make on the buffers would be to make it a separate funded incentive. Don't tie it to this ordinance if you want to promote that. And maybe make it an incentive for these farmers to want to do what we expect them as far as the ordinance is concerned.
Mm-hmm. That's a great idea. Mm-hmm.
Other thoughts? So Supervisor Kroll and then Supervisor Drayback, and then I've got some thoughts. So Supervisor Kroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is in regards to an emergency spreading of manure. What would be an actual justification that would be used for that situation?
Do you want to?
Oh, I can sit there, too. That's fine.
Sure. Oh, I think you just turned it. There you go.
So an emergency would be, if let's say if they do have long-term storage, if their pit's getting really full, instead of allowing it to run over, trying to find fields to get that applied, that would be one. And we've worked with people in the past on that. It's better to try to go out and take some off the top, get a little bit applied here and there, not allow it to run over. Otherwise, that just turns into a lot larger issue later on. Seen it where it runs under the snow and other things like that. And then some other emergency situations, some of it would be just, you know, we'd have to look at the situation as they went on. I mean, there's some things that you can't really predict. There's still stuff that we see that we're surprised by.
Great, thank you. And then I just wanted to make a comment sort of off of the buffers as well, since it's a hot topic, and off of Tom's comment. So the way this is written is that the ordinance would have to be followed in 3 to 5 years. My concern is that if we wanted to tackle something with buffers, that's another 3 to 5 years after something is decided. So while we don't have to decide on something about buffers, maybe there is a delayed timeline as well that is associated with that. So it's just a thought.
Supervisor Drayback, you were next in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You had said that you had talked to some farm groups, because you had suggested last time you were here, were you going to do that? What was their comments, if I may ask?
We haven't met with any groups officially yet, because we still, in November, we still didn't know for sure how this was all going to look. So I did reach out to Farmers Union and Farm Bureau in the fall, and I'm kind of in a holding pattern to be on the agenda with them. So I was talking with Kelly earlier, saying I think February is going to be our month, hopefully, to have a meeting. So the only group we've really discussed this with in detail so far is our farmer-led group, EPIC, our producer-led group, and pretty much every EPIC meeting we've talked about this the last couple of months, knowing we've had these discussions, and you won't be surprised to hear that group is extremely supportive of these changes. Again, it's a conservation-focused group, so they're biased towards conservation, so we should probably be surprised if they weren't supportive of such a change. But that's truly the only group so far that we've talked with in detail about that. This has been on the front page of the record review a couple of different times. So I have had probably, I'm going to say about 20 individual conversations with farmers that have contacted me after reading the newspaper or dropping us an email. And I still have not talked with anyone. I've talked with one person that did not like it, that sent an email. Other than that, every other conversation has been very positive, very positive. I would say a lot of the positive comments are focused around people wanting to use our surface waters to recreate and more in Marathon County. And they're saddened by the fact that many of our waters are not safe to recreate in at this point. And so it's good for us to keep in mind, because we're so often focused on the science, saying we want to reduce phosphorus. And, we know that this is harming, the water and the fish and all of that. But it's like, it's so easy to forget the economic loss too, of not doing something, the economic opportunities that come along with recreating and using our waters for many different types of recreation as well. So yeah, but we're very excited to meet with these groups, and I'm excited to report back on, the general consensus. And I also want to encourage people at those meetings to come to the public comment portion of these meetings and talk to us here as well, or submit some type of written public comment so that ERC can hear those comments as well. It's very important.
Go ahead, Randy.
At the last meeting, didn't you say buffers were, I don't know if there was a inexpensive or a better way of preventing a lot of runoff? So putting them or slowing them down, wouldn't that be a mistake, instead of using it at the same time, putting it into this program? Or is that just too much to implement?
Well, Matt may have some comments. I'll go first. It may be helpful to have a couple different thoughts on that. I will say, with county-wide implementation of wanting to update an ordinance to substantial changes, that does take a significant amount, of staff time and energy. And just due to the sheer size of our county, if we were to require some type of buffer as well, I would worry about how well we would be able to help implement that with landowners. I just don't know that we would have the resources on staff to do it. And an ordinance loses its strength very quickly if you do not have the resources to follow through. And so we just want to make sure that we stay at the appropriate level of, staff have resources and time to handle and assist with and provide excellent customer service, which we do right now, we don't want to see that ratio become lopsided. And I know, my staff shared that concern when we had these discussions in detail, because I cannot tell you how tempting it is to just be like, let's mandate those buffers tomorrow here in this county. Like, I would probably run around the courthouse 200 times if we did that, pumping my fist like Rocky. It'd be a wonderful, amazing victory, but we have to be practical at the same time. And, our ordinance is already very strong. I do like Supervisor Kroll's idea of, working in some type of delayed implementation with buffers so that, we're not a decade out. White-haired Granny Kirsty is up here saying, how about those buffers now? It's like, so it would be nice to work that in a little quicker if possible. Oh, use your microphone too.
If all the other requirements are being followed, the buffers seem to be secondary. And if you'd want to do the buffers, maybe some cost sharing might help that. But I think if everybody follows all the other rules and restrictions, the buffers, they're very helpful, but probably some cost sharing would maybe encourage more people to do maybe some.
I agree. Yeah, I would love to hear Matt's comments on some of this as well. But my one quick response to Marilyn with that is that if this committee or county board would work with us to find some type of funding source for cost sharing, we would see a lot more buffers going in. Like, we would see an upwards graph of, really going in. We do have limited cost sharing resources for buffers right now, just not enough to see a large scale change in buffers.
And like everything Kirsty said, I agree with. The two things that we're proposing here, the winter spreading and the buffers, they're both fairly new practices. I'm not aware of anybody else really in Wisconsin that's doing them, so we're really creating this from the ground up by looking at what other states have done. And right now, for what we're looking at, probably the winter spreading is going to give us a little bit more bang for our buck. The buffers, if we do the winter spreading first and then come and implement the buffers later, I think they're both very good practices to implement.
Okay. So I want to be clear about what I'm about to say, because I think there's going to be multiple people in this room that disagree with me. As the chair, I tend not to say anything that totally tanks a discussion, but I do want to make my thoughts known on this. So this is something that the county considered before. I think in 2018 or 2019, a similar proposal was brought in front of this committee. And I remember it pretty vividly because I was actually the deciding vote that essentially stopped those discussions from going forward with the winter manure spreading ban. The way I view this is a little bit differently than I think some other people on the committee or even staff view this issue, is that I always view this as a matter of storage and proactive planning. An ordinance like this to me is reactionary, and I don't think that's good planning. In addition to that, at least in my view, I'm not a scientist. I don't own a white coat. Don't have a relevant degree either. But our winters appear to be getting shorter too. For whatever reason, I'm not going to get into that today. But I think that has to be considered too if the county is going to look at this an ordinance like this long term. Like I said, as the chair, I'm not going to completely tank a discussion or anything like that, but I would not be in favor of something like this. So, other thoughts, discussion? We have been having really good discussion thus far. I want to make that clear. Supervisor Kurt, did you have something to add?
I guess a couple of things, and so I appreciate the discussion and appreciate the willingness of looking at this, the one, several things that come to my mind. You're talking, Christie, if I understand correctly, the way you're proposing would be about 175 farms right now is what we're looking at that now would be required a winter spreading permit. And those would be the ones that we're regulating that no winter spreading would be allowed is without moving to a nutrient management plan. And so all of that requires additional staff time. So the question that I'm dealing with in my mind is, if we were looking at this, how much additional staff time are we looking at and additional staff needs and resources at the department? Because as you clearly indicated, and I think appropriately so, if you create an ordinance and we don't have the ability to, one, enforce it or implement it, it's not worth having. So that's my concern. And then also along the timeline of 3 to 5 years, does that give enough time to be able to have the discussion with the farm groups, with the farmers, and what resources they're going to need to implement, a change in practice?
Mm-hmm. Yes, appreciate your comments. Thank you. I will say with the data, we pulled that, those are preliminary numbers. So if we say 175 don't have manure storage, we can't confidently say 175 dairy farms don't have manure storage and aren't going to have a problem. We can't say that. What we need to do is to dig into every individual scenario and see. We don't know what's going on in all those farms. You know what I mean? It's like, it could be literally maybe 50 farms out of that 175. Truly, it could be. My gut says it may be, a lower number than 175 that's going to need some type of assistance with this. Through nearly half a decade, I have zero hesitation that our staff would have a problem at all working with these farms individually and making sure that they're all prepared for what's to come. We have 8 full-time conservationists on staff, none of whom are rookies and are all highly qualified to work with farms on these specific scenarios. One of our staff members works half-time at the local NRCS office, which is a federal conservation office, and he has access to grants and programming through that office to help facilitate grant applications, et cetera. So we already have, a leg up in that regard. We are not anticipating further staff need for implementing this ordinance. We would not anticipate needing additional staff. We would just incorporate this into what we're doing. And we are working with way more than this amount of farms every single year on, very detailed programming. Most of these folks we are already talking with frequently for cost sharing, for nutrient management. So without diving into the details of all the data and spending a bunch of staff time doing that, we want to make sure that we have some type of initial blessing from the ERC, and then we can really dive into some of the data with a little bit more detail as well. So you asked about staff time and resources. I'm trying to think, there's a second part of the question that I made. Can you remember the second part of the question? I feel like I didn't completely answer that. 3 to 5 years. Yeah.
The 3 to 5 years and the resources that the farmers are going to need to bring to change practice implementation.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the concerns, obviously, if we're going to require storage now for some farms, storage is extremely expensive and maybe cost prohibitive in some cases without cost sharing and may put some farmers out of business, and that would be one of my concerns too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We hear and understand that concern as well. We spent a lot of deliberation talking about what would be an appropriate delayed implementation period, and we wanted to throw 3 to 5 years out there and let the committee decide what they would be most comfortable with. We do feel like 3 years would be the minimum of what we would feel comfortable with as staff to move forward with the no man left behind concept, knowing that we're going to work with every single farm individually and make sure they have what they need. Now, if you recall, most of the farms that fell into the category of not having manure storage and not being able to spread in the winter, it's just February and March. Just February and March. Those other farms that can't spread on frozen soils during the winter, we have the data showing that they already have adequate storage. So many of them are still spreading just by choice because it is more convenient to not have a full to the top manure pit in the spring, or the fall. And so they're choosing by choice to continually spread during the winter. And we know that, if we could just have some type of rule in place in our ordinance to say, this county needs you to use the storage that you have for good, like they would be fine. And so it's a very small group that would only need to work out a solution for just February and March. And we have so much data from the University of Wisconsin showing that these are our 2 high-risk months. And so we feel so confident that as staff, we have the time, the resources, and ways to work with people that they can get through February and March, and it's not going to be something that would be putting people out of business. We would not bring something forward to this committee or in this county that we would feel could potentially put people out of business.
To me, the shocking comment that I think Matt made was that 40% of the farms don't have nutrient management plans.
Right.
That's been out how many years now? That's been available. We've had the tools.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were allowed to police, our industry is allowed to police ourselves, and we failed. So now we got to go to the next step and force the issue a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
That's my opinion.
Yep, absolutely.
Supervisor Trebeck. And then just to give the committee an idea for discussion, I'd like to do another 10 to 15 minutes of discussion on this item, and then I think a appropriate path forward. I'm not going to restrict the committee from discussing this in the future. I think an appropriate path forward would be for staff to have some engagement with those farm groups, and from there we can have some more discussions. This will be an agenda item for at least next month, and we'll see where we go from there. But just to give you an idea where I'd like to go forward today. Supervisor Drabeck, you had your hand up.
Thank you. I was just wondering on the 590 plans, why wouldn't they? Is there a reason, that 40% that Tom has brought up, that are not doing it? Why not?
So usually the ones that don't have plans are ones that aren't involved with programs. They haven't been in farmland preservation. They don't have a permitted manure storage. They haven't worked with NRCS. It's just groups that haven't been involved with us or some other agency in some way or involved in a program. Nutrient management plans are a good thing. It allows farmers to plan where they're going to put their manure, look at low-risk fields for applications. Some guys just feel that if they're not a certain size, they don't need a plan, that they can apply where they want. There's still risk involved with that, so there's definitely a benefit to it, and we do have classes that we offer, which essentially becomes a no-cost or no-cost option for farms, so they don't have to go to a co-op to write a plan. And we're continually advertising to try to get more people involved with that. We pay for soil sampling. We sit down, work through the plans with the farmers, so we're trying to get more people involved as time goes on. But sometimes it's just that they haven't been involved or needed a plan in some way.
Is there a difference between solids and liquids being spread during those months?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what we're proposing is just a ban on liquid and slurry manure during February and March. So manure that flows more or less. People could still apply semi-solid or solid manure during those times.
Mm-hmm.
Other thoughts and feedback for today? Okay. So, you said February, hopefully to engage with those farm groups, Kirsty?
Yeah, just a clarifying question. So when we're meeting with these groups, not without knowing what ERC is going to be potentially supporting or recommending, should we essentially go through the same type of presentation that we did with ERC here today? Would it be beneficial to do that, not knowing if ERC, at this point, I don't feel like I have a clear vision of whether or not ERC will support this. So I would hate to necessarily go to these groups and say this is looking like this is what might be moving forward, but you know what I mean?
I think you're on the right track. I think that for transparency's sake, you can say that this same presentation was presented to the Environmental Resources Committee. It's something that they could choose to pursue and see what the feedback is from the groups. Supervisor Brew?
I guess my thought is, this is my first year, but after discussions, you've been having these discussions for several years already, apparently. And you had said last time that you've done all your work to give us all the numbers we need, and we keep kicking it down the road.
Yes,
Well, I think maybe it's time to quit doing that
I agree.
and not keep putting it off.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, just for the newer folks, just to give a historical perspective. So when 80% of the fishery in the Big Old Plain Reservoir was killed in 2009, there's about 20 groups from the county that came together saying, we need to make sure this never happens again. And they developed a plan called Strategies for Reducing Fish Kills in the Big Old Plain Reservoir. It's a wonderful plan. Many of you became familiar with it when we discussed the need for new aerators that the county helped fund. And one of the number one items that came out of that plan, which Marathon County Board signed off on and supported, is that the number one thing we need to do is reduce winter spreading of manure in the Big Old Plain Reservoir. That was followed by the Big Old Plain Lake Management Plan, which was published shortly after that, in which one of the number one recommendations was to reduce the winter spreading of manure, in which Marathon County supported that plan as well. And then in 2021, the Marathon County Board adopted an updated county land and water resource management plan, in which one of the recommendations in there for reducing phosphorus runoff in our surface waters was to reduce the winter spreading of manure. So this has already been voted on and supported by the Marathon County Board for over a decade, and nothing has ever been done. And our predecessors and current people on the board have voted to support it every single time. So to still even be having these deliberations is slightly confusing as a conservationist, and my conservation coworkers who have worked in our department for over 30 years. We really have a strong desire to move the needle in water quality in this county. And trust me when I say that cannot happen unless we make a big change like this. We will never see it happen in our lifetime.
So I want to add a few comments there. One of the reasons why I think we need to be careful with this issue is that for the Western supervisors, so I'm looking at this group here, and I think it's just Supervisor Drabeck and myself who I would count being on the western side of the county. This issue is like picking up a skunk by the tail. That's just the way it is, because there's a lot of there's so much ag on our half of the county. Not that there isn't ag throughout the county, but there's a lot of ag over there, and this would affect a lot of them. To your point, Supervisor DeBrew, I agree with you. If there's a problem, it should be addressed as promptly as possible. I'll add one caveat. It's better to have as many people on the boat as possible before it sets sail. So to give you an example, a couple of years ago, the county updated its animal waste ordinance. And Supervisor Drabeck definitely remembers this, but that item was actually pulled from the county board agenda at the informational meeting because Marathon County Farm Bureau sent us a letter that had a bunch of concerns in it about the ordinance. We pulled it, we addressed them, and it was on the agenda next month, and it was passed. Right? That's the way I like to do things. And I'm sure, given the opportunity, having as many people on that boat as possible, I'm sure every supervisor would want that, right? That's why I think before we have too much more discussion, I think it would be a good idea to get some input from those community groups. If the ERC wants to continue forward after that, if there's good feedback or bad feedback, fine. But I think at least we owe that to the interests in the community to let them weigh in. So those are my thoughts. Okay, Chair Gibbs.
Christie, so I guess I'm confused. The 174 or the 175 farms that we're talking about here, do they have winter storage?
There's half of them that don't have storage, no.
Then how would they have liquid manure, or I guess I'm I'm confused as to,
What they're currently doing with it.
right, I mean, they may have manure, but it may be, maybe semi-solid manure and not liquid. So is that are we saying that they would not be, if they do not have storage, so we are telling them that they could not spread when they clean the barn that day? I'm just asking because I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, if they had a liquid or slurry manure, what they would have to do is either try to find some place that they could store it or some other alternative to it. If they had solid, semi-solid manure, then they could apply like they have been in the past.
So what's the differentiate between semi-solid and liquid or slurry?
Usually like a liquid or a slurry is something that's usually 12% or less. Usually when you get into like a semi-solid manure, that'll stack actually or hold an angle of repose. You know, it's something that's stackable.
Yeah, many of those farms, we would call them daily haul operations, meaning every single day they have to, go out and spread manure. Milk house waste is also tied in with a lot of that as well, sometimes in the same type of receptacle or a different one. So even if there are solids to deal with, sometimes it becomes mixed with the milk house waste, which is a lot of it is water, but it still needs to be taken somewhere. So yeah, the daily haul operations. And we can dive into the data and try to get a better idea of, out of the 175 that we think don't have manure storage, how many of those are daily haul operations, how many of them are just like an error to be in that data, which could be a very real possibility. This was very high level data collection. This was not on the ground data collection by any means. So if that data is helpful to you all, we are more than happy to spend some time really getting into the details of that and providing it to you.
Other discussion? Oh, Chair Gibbs.
I think, that's critical, I think, because it's going to equate into, what kind of costs and options that those farms have that currently don't have storage, that are currently spreading winter on a daily basis. If that's the ones that we're going to be looking at regulating, because I think we need to understand, because you know as well as I do that winter storage facility cost is significant for these operations. We're talking $600,000-$800,000 for facilities to put in storage facilities. So especially if they're in areas that are really challenged. So I think it's critical that we understand what we're asking those farmers to look at and implement.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Other discussion? All right. Any final thoughts? This is going to come back. So, do you have direction as far as engaging with those community groups, do you think, Kirsty?
Yeah, I'm happy to reach out to them and talk with them and have these discussions and bring comment back. I would like to start, I think, if possible, maybe in something like March. I don't know if February would be appropriate yet, but March, start putting a public comment agenda item related to proposed changes. I guess it would depend on when ERC feels like you'd like to start receiving public comments, either written or in person during meetings.
Well, what I was thinking was, and thank you for bringing up March, because after I said the February meeting, I realized that if we're meeting the first Tuesday, it would be kind of hard for there to be a lot of feedback gathered, especially if, a group like Farm Bureau isn't meeting until later February.
Right.
So what I would be comfortable with is having this notice the exact same way today, but when you do engage with those community groups, gather the feedback that they're willing to provide, but then also say that, hey, the Environmental Resources Committee will be discussing this more in March. There is general public comment available at that meeting. If you'd like to provide additional comment, or your members, you can attend that meeting and provide it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else for today? Otherwise, I think we got one more item to take up today, and then we're out of here. So anything else? All right, Matt, Kirsty, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, we are on to 5A2, forthcoming Chapter 17 Zoning Code Comprehensive Update. Shad, what you got?
All right, just real quick, I wanted to let the committee know. So in our Chapter 17 zoning code, it does state that the county will do a comprehensive zoning revision every 10 years with the intent of allowing townships that participate in county zoning to either leave county zoning if they want. They can enter at any time, but so that's in our code. So just the last update we did was in 2016. So we're starting the process of the 2026 update. I did put together just a very general timeline on what we're thinking as far as how we'll go about that comprehensive update. It's not going to be as extreme as it was last time. Last time we literally went from one type of code to a completely separate type of code. This is more or less, it'll look like a lot of our other Chapter 17 amendments with a little bit more extensive research as far as the town input, because we are going to be sending out a survey to the town to see what's working for them, if they've noticed any issues, and try and get feedback from them to help guide some of those extra amendments. But because our code does specify we'll do a comprehensive revision every 10 years to allow for them to exit if they choose, that's why this is being referred to as a comprehensive zoning code update. So just real quick run through February of 2025. It'll either be late January or early February. We're going to send a survey to the towns, a very simple survey, but it essentially will give them the opportunity, if they have issues with our current zoning code, to bring those forward to us. We welcome it always, but this is just another opportunity for them to really dig in and see if there are things they'd want to change. We can bring that forth to you guys. And we can have those discussions. May through August will be kind of the ERC discussions based on the town comments. CPZ staff will bring some amendments that we feel should be looked at or addressed. And then as well as if the committee has any other ideas or discussions, we'll kind of work through that process. September and October of 25, we'll be looking to have kind of that first draft of the zoning code ready to submit to the towns to get their other comments on it, depending what our discussions are during the committee process. And then once we receive those comments, November, we'll have those discussions with ERC, modify the draft based on the discussions if it's needed. And then with the hopes of December of 2025, kind of having that finalized draft of the zoning code update ready to be adopted. It can be adopted in 2025. It's just the resolution that goes along with it would specify it wouldn't go into effect until 2026. So with the goal of having the new code ready to go in effect January 1 of 2026. So it is kind of a quick process. I'm sure it'll go by very fast. The requirement necessarily isn't have it done by the 1st. It just has to be adopted in 2026. So we do have some leeway there if we feel we need more time. From an implementation standpoint, it would be very, for lack of a better term, convenient if it started on the 1st, so we have a clean date on which we're starting to enforce the new code. So that's why we chose that as our goal. Again, if things pop up where we have to extend it further, we can. It just has to be adopted in 2026. And then once it's adopted, townships have a year from the date of adoption to choose whether they want to stay with the county and county zoning or essentially leave county zoning. But we'll start those discussions. I just wanted to let you guys know that that's coming in the near future, and we'll kind of work through this process together.
2 quick questions. One, are we doing that advisory committee like we did 10 years ago?
So with it not being a different code that we're developing, we weren't planning to do the advisory committee.
That's fine.
That one I think was more in line of we're going from one thing to something vastly different. So in this case, this is going to look like I mean, there'll be a few more amendments probably than we normally would on a normal annual basis, but I don't think it's going to be that extreme of a change.
Okay. And then the other question was, if I remember correctly, maybe 80% of the way through the process, we did some workshops or outreach events. Like I think I went to one at the town of Ween Town Hall. Is that planned as well?
I think open houses or things
Open
like
house,
that,
thank you.
where we have open houses, that's something we generally try and do with a lot of our code updates. So that'll definitely likely be incorporated, probably in that May through August range, where we're kind of getting the town comments and whatnot. We do generally try and hold those open houses so they can have adequate time and resources to come in, ask questions, or bring stuff forward to us.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
This is not going to be a comprehensive revision then, it's just going to be updating?
So it is a comprehensive revision because we're declaring it a comprehensive revision. But in the grand scheme of things, it's an update, but because our code requires us to have a comprehensive update to our zoning code, no matter how minor it is, if we declare it a comprehensive update, it'll qualify as that, what we need to do for what's in our chapter 17.
Okay. Questions, comments? All right. Thank you, Shad. 7, we got nothing. 8, next meeting, February 4th, 2025, 3 p.m. Assembly room, future agenda items. A, committee members are asked to bring ideas for future discussion. B, announcements, requests, correspondence. Anybody got anything? I just want to say, while I was away, thank you for the well wishes. I appreciate it. It's good to be back. So, all right. Item number 9, adjournment. Who'd like to make that motion? Supervisor Drabeck with the motion, second by Supervisor Schoenborn. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you, committee members. Thank you, staff. You're in trouble. Good. You're in trouble.
This meeting is no longer being recorded.